The state of the visual effects industry back in 97, 98 was really interesting because we were embracing digital technology to do visual effects for films, but we were still making film.
If you're talking about visual effects in the last couple of years of the 20th century, things have just sort of come over a particular hump. We had Jurassic Park and Toy Story in 1994 or 95 in that area. So now things are beginning to mature a little bit, and you're not seeing these effects limited only to the big blockbusting pictures. And that's where a movie like Deep Rising is actually an interesting phenomenon, because you're seeing these very, very high level effects being brought into relatively low budget movies.
The technology was considered the barrier to entry. If you didn't have an optical printer, which most people didn't, you couldn't exactly be doing this in your home. We were at the point where we were starting to see more affordable consumer, prosumer software packages. I was a huge user of Adobe After Effects in its early incarnations, and even today. And that meant that you could be doing things on your home computers. Prior to this, and even through this period, you had to have huge SGI machines or all sorts of hardware and technical support to be able to do these kind of things. And we were starting in that period where you could actually put outputs straight out of your Macintosh or your PC and make Hollywood level quality visual effects for major motion pictures.
So I would say that's kind of what defined that era of visual effects, was that kind of honing of the techniques into an efficient place. When you're doing research and development on these things, it takes longer, you have a lot more sort of trial and error. Here now you're taking the things that we already know how to do and trying to apply them. And that's really what was going on here, was trying to figure out how to take what we already knew and make it more efficient.
Banned from the Ranch was a company that was started in probably the early 90s by my partner, my longtime partner, Casey Cannon. She used to work at ILM, and she was friends with a couple of guys at ILM named Mark DePay and Steve Spaz Williams. And the way the company name came about was because they were part of Lucasfilm. Their members and their employees would get invited out to dinners and talks that were held out at Skywalker Ranch. One night it was Timothy Leary, and Spaz and Mark, as they were known, among a lot of other people, including Casey, had gone out to the ranch to have this dinner and with Timothy Leary, have a talk. After most people were gone and everybody was leaving, Mark and Spaz decided to go exploring around George's ranch house and ended up trespassing into his office. Basically were caught by security because there were sensors around and everything, and they were escorted off the property. And the next business day at ILM, the word came down that they were in some really deep trouble because they not only trespassed into his office, sat at his desk, put their feet up, turned on his edit droid. They also, when the security people came in and said, "Who are you guys?" they said that they were the general manager of ILM and some of the higher ups. So they got in a little bit of trouble, and the word was they were going to be fired. Problem was, this was 1990, 91, and they were the key computer graphics supervisor and animation supervisor on Terminator 2. So they were a little too important and key to that film. Instead of being fired, they were banned from the ranch for a year. They were not allowed to come to any of the events, to go to any of the dinners or anything like that, the company picnics or anything.
The job of visual effects supervisor, I think, is really amazing. Of course, it's my job, so I think it's amazing. But one of the things about visual effects supervision is that you're one of the few people who, if you're lucky anyway, gets to get in at the beginning of the project and work all the way through to the end. You're going to plan the visual effects. You're going to work with the DP and the actors and the directors and all the different people that are involved, from the hairdressers, the makeup guys, everything. Doesn't always work out that way. It, for me, didn't work out that way on Deep Rising. because I came in sort of at the end when there was extra firepower needed to finish up some of the sequences. So I actually had an interesting experience on Deep Rising because you had to work with the things that were already on the table. What was required was for us to develop a couple of sequences that, were sort of pivotal. So it was a really great scene that they had as a section where Treat Williams and Famke Janssen are driving through the flooded cruise ship in a jet ski, pursued by this amazing, crazy creature. And one of the things I think is important to talk about here is that just because we had the opportunity to maybe be a little loose with the continuity, we didn't take that. We worked really, really hard to make sure that our stuff matched Dream Quest absolutely, and we achieved that. That's something that was a unique aspect of the work that we did. It has to do with the fact that since we weren't in at the beginning, we were inheriting this whole look of the creature from Robotine and the look development that Dream Quest had done, all of which was great. It's just that as we were trying to get all these things done, the time was running out. And so they employed us at ILM to come in and do some consistent sequences and a few one-off shots, take the pressure off of everybody and make all the shots better. That was the plan. And so we really took that to heart. And even though it was kind of a 911 call, it was something that all of us on the ILM crew were very excited about. We said, let's do it. Let's get this stuff to match Dream Quest stuff exactly. We also were assigned 5 or 6 other unique shots, like we did the last scene in the movie, the Big Island. And so they had this helicopter shot. They shot it off the coast of Malibu. We don't know what the lens is. We don't know if they were zooming. It's jittery as it's flying at some unknown and non-uniform speed. It couldn't be a worse nightmare for match moving a camera. And in those days, automated systems for doing camera match moving were in an incredibly rudimentary phase. In fact, we used one on this shot, and it was the first time that ILM had used an automated tracker ever. So we built the model that we thought approximated the beach. We ran it through the computer tracker, and then Yusei Wesky, a really great matte painter, did the painting of the island itself. And then we added in smoke in the background, and we added in a procedural thrashing with the trees being uprooted and all that kind of stuff.
Now what?
Banned from the Ranch started out doing screen graphics for movies like Congo and Twister and The Relic and Dante's Peak. And I was the creative director there, and we would design a lot of these scientific interfaces, which is a really interesting process. We were kind of the computer version of the barrels from Jaws, where instead of showing the shark, you have a surrogate for the shark, which were the barrels that were being dragged through the water, which is a lot easier than a mechanical shark that was breaking all the time. And in our case, we were having to substitute for either creatures or tornadoes or volcanoes, and how to keep the tension up without having to, the show having to spend lots of money doing expensive visual effects of those things and saving those for the big climax. After we proved ourselves doing the sequence for the computer hacker, Stephen Sommers basically, I think, realized, hey, maybe we can solve some other narrative issues and things like that with these guys. Instead of having to go to some of these larger houses to do all these little fixes, they were able to come to Banned from the Ranch. And we loved doing those kind of little shots just because they were story related. They weren't just about, big creatures and big explosions and stuff like that. We were actually interested in helping to tell the story and using visual effects to help tell the story. And so one of the shots we had to do was adding a digital tentacle and underwater explosion behind Mason as he gets dragged back. And I guess the original footage just had him on a cable being dragged back, and you never saw what happened to him. You just assumed he died. We ended up adding a digital tentacle behind him, behind the bubbles and everything. And then they wanted to add the explosion of the grenade he's holding that he's just armed and set off. And we got a stock underwater explosion from Crimson Tide, and we comped that into back the shot. And then at the end of the film, in the original, Kevin J. O'Connor's character, he died. And apparently there was a test screening they did of the film, and people were very upset So they came to us and said, we got to try to come up with a way to show that he survives, because we're going to do a reshoot on a beach with, we're bringing back Treat Williams and Famke Janssen and Kevin J. O'Connor, and we're going to do this little scene at the beach. We're going to redo that scene, but with him still alive. And how are we going to show that he gets off the ship okay? Because they're, a mile offshore or more, and he's been shot in the leg, so he can't really swim. How's he gonna get there? And they noted the fact that in earlier shots there was this big yellow surfboard that was attached to the side of the sampan, and they figured that's how we'll get him to the island. Well, how do we remind people that it's there? Because in the later scenes when they're running the sampan to blow up the Argonautica, we don't really see that. They came up with the idea of, we want to add the surfboard digitally to the down angle explosion shot when the sampan blows up. Let's have it flying up by camera. That'll make it really clear. You'd think it's a minor thing, but it's really important to help tell the story and to help the filmmaker get across what they want the audience to note and to feel and to buy off. So we love doing those kind of shots.
Almost everything that we did in terms of the creature itself was digital. What we did really work on that aspect of digital versus practical was in the water splashes. And so what we did is we started out using procedural effects, which were really in their infancy in those days. You couldn't do oceans yet. You couldn't do foamy waves or any of that kind of stuff. But we could do kind of splash elements, and they had to be lit very specifically. And then what we did, once we got that kind of working, is we would go out and shoot very specific splash elements for use with very specific movements. So we did the animation first, allowed the splash elements to be generated procedurally from the motion of the creature, and then went out and photographed actual water splashes against a black screen in order to put them in on top of the synthetic stuff that we had done. And that concept of building those two things together was fundamental to the way that we did every single shot. And we actually had a whole raft of techniques that were developed by Scott Frankel to be able to take the live action stuff and the synthetic stuff and have a predictable pathway for making it look good. He called it the Bubble Funk program. And anybody that worked at ILM on Deep Rising will immediately remember that, because we were always talking about it. And it created really hilarious sorts of commentary in the review sessions where you'd use bubble funkin' as a verb, and everybody knew what it was, but anybody that walked into the room that wasn't on the crew would go, "What are they talking about? Bubble funkin' the big kaboom? What is that?" And of course, the big kaboom was one of the big water drops that we did, where we made a huge splash in front of the black screen with lights showing off all the highlights. And that was one of our go-to elements, the big kaboom. So we were bubble funkin' it.
We only did a few shots, but we got a surprisingly large credit for that on the film, and I was very surprised when I finally saw the film. But I guess that we were able to provide the kind of things that they needed and show them a different model of how visual effects could be done. That even though ILM and DreamQuest and Blur did all these huge shots and created the creature and did so much fantastic stuff, that there was still room for smaller houses to do more specific kind of things for the show and to focus on storytelling. It used to be that you'd work on visual effects, and sometimes if you're working on digital visual effects, you were able to do a single shot from start to finish yourself, and you had ownership of the shot. You could say, I did that shot. Nowadays, it's all broken down into different departments doing it, and that the most you can say is, "Oh, I rotoed that shadow matte for that shot," which is not quite the same sense of ownership. So there's artistry that goes into all of these areas, from the roto guy to the animators to the match movers, and they all deserve to be appreciated.
Dan Taylor was the head of our computer graphics animation team. And he brought a whole bunch of animators who understood stop motion. And this was really an interesting way to approach this problem. because they understood the way to move puppets correctly, and they'd had enough experience working at ILM on the other pictures that preceded Deep Rising to understand how to use keyframing and so on to get what they wanted. Dan set up a mock-up of the set that was miniaturized, and they had like bendy armatures that they used to mock up every shot in the movie so that the stop-mo animators could see it in 3D in the real world and understand exactly what they were supposed to do before they went into the computer and began animating using the computer puppets. So we had a pretty high-powered team. It was sort of a summer project. We had a bunch of really great compositors and a bunch of really great CGI artists, and we had a bunch of really great animators, and everybody just came into the room and said, okay, we got to bust out these 24 shots in X number of weeks, which was very short, and let's do it, and it was really a great team, and all those guys have gone on, to bigger and better things, and we've gotten so much from that time. Just a really short, concise thing, because understanding how to stay efficient is really a key thing to doing good visual effects as well, and that's what I learned from Deep Rising, was how to take the things that you know and do them in an efficient and effective way, cut to the chase, get them done, make them look great. Spend your time making them look really good in the fine-tuning stage and get them into the movie.
One of the things that people need to realize about visual effects is that it's all about storytelling. It's not just about how cool it looks, it's about how you're telling the story. And a good visual effects artist has to be a good storyteller.